The United States of America. Unity and oneness is what we're made of. One nation under God, it's plain to see. We're showing the whole world what a country should be. United we stand in America, hand in hand in America. Together as one in a land that we love. United we stand in America.
Good morning, everyone out there. Welcome to Changing Times. It is Wednesday, July the 8th. It's a special day, and you're going to find out why in just a minute. This is show number 299. What an amazing feat Dr. Mary and I have done, and Don Blackard and Louis Michael and other people have filled in. We have made it through almost 300 shows. I am Lynn Morris.
And I'm Dr. Mary Byrne.
Yes, you are Dr. Mary Byrne. And look, folks, thanks for being on our show today, watching our show, listening to our show. Look at Dr. Mary Byrne. She's got all these books over here. Look at me. I don't have any books. Now, she is the scholarly one, and that's why she has a PhD in education, and I just have a master's degree, in healthcare administration. So I can look across the table and understand who the scholar is today. But no, I tell you what, this is part two. If you all watched last week, I think we had a great show. Presiding Commissioner Bob Dixon in Springfield did a great job, and Major Susan Wilson did a great job talking about the importance of America's 250th anniversary. We're going to continue it today on part two, and the first part will be we got a 24-minute video, and it comes from the United States National Archives, and Dr. Mary Byrne found that for us. That's going to be the reading of the U.S. Constitution. This today, every state hopefully every state in our country, all the states around us are certainly doing it. They're reading the Declaration of Independence. Today was the public reading 250 years ago. Public reading.
And that's what Bob was talking about, and the event he organized for today. So if you're in the Springfield area, go to the Greene County Courthouse at 2 o'clock.
Yeah, the old courthouse. The old courthouse. Mm-hmm. There's going to be the former governor is going to be reading it because his ancestors actually had part to do with that. It's going to be really Governor Nixon. I mean, we got to. There'll be
and John Ashcroft.
John Ashcroft's going to be. Here. Yeah, John Ashcroft's going to be singing.
Who is also a former governor.
Former governor and former U.S. attorney. Mm-hmm. So I mean, we can claim that in Springfield, Missouri. Not everybody can claim that they've had a U.S.
And we've had
attorney.
John Ashcroft on the show.
Yeah, John Ashcroft. He was my law instructor at SMS, both Law 1 and Law 2, so I appreciate him. And Judge Max Bacon, he's going to be, they're going to be singing some songs today. I hope we can join in. Hymns. They're going to be singing hymns. I hope we can kind of join in a little bit. So we actually had, this morning, we're going to have Stephen Paul McCollum. He's the man that just sung the opening song, and he had a great crowd in Texas. I understand thousands of people celebrating 4th of July in Texas, and he's got 2 new songs he's working at the studio. We were going to have him on today, and for the first half, and sing 3 or 4 songs that he's known for, very patriotic Christian songs. We'll get him on again. He's just a very busy guy, but anyway, We'll what else do we need to say before we get started?
So, in lieu of having our guest, we're going to continue the discussion of the contribution Thomas Jefferson made in the Declaration, in writing the Declaration of Independence. And we're going to start with a video to remind us about the contribution to the world our founding documents made to institutionalize or codify freedom as the responsibility of the government. So we are not subjects, we are citizens. There's a huge difference.
Right.
And our founding documents asserted that. So.
Okay, well, let's just watch that. If it's later on in the day, you could sit back and enjoy it and eat some popcorn, but now just eat a donut or something like that. Enjoy that, and then we'll be back and do the rest of the show.
Good day to you. I am Thomas Jefferson. If I had but 10 seconds to tell you about myself, I would tell you these 3 things and not a word more. I was the author of the Declaration of American Independence, of the Statute of Virginia for Religious Freedom, and the father of the University of Virginia. Fortunately, we have a bit more time than that to spend together today. Thus, I am honored to introduce myself a little more thoroughly than the fleeting tick-tock of your modern timekeeping might otherwise allow. You may have wondered why I did not include any public offices in that list. I do not want to be remembered for having been representative to the Virginia House of Burgesses from the county of Albemarle, where I grew up, nor as a representative of Virginia to the Second Continental Congress, and to the Congress of the United States under the Articles of Confederation. I do not want to be remembered as having represented the United States in France, nor as having served as the first Secretary of State under the U.S. Constitution. I do not want to be remembered as having served as the nation's second Vice President. Well, nobody wants to be remembered as having been Vice President. And I do not want to be remembered for having been the third President of the United States. In a government by the people, those who hold public offices are servants. If they serve well, they deserve to be remembered fondly for what they did, not for the title they held. I devoted roughly half of my 83 years from 1743 to 1826 to public service. On July 4th, 1776, after the vote on the Declaration of Independence, I was placed on a committee for, among other purposes, proposing a motto for the United States. The motto that Congress eventually adopted was E pluribus unum, which is Latin for out of many, one. I dedicated my life in public service to the idea that America will derive our greatness from the vast resources that can be found only in a diversity of opinion, and that we will derive our strength from our ability to focus that diversity into a unity of purpose. I articulated our purpose as one people in the Declaration of Independence. If I had but 10 seconds to tell you that purpose, I would say it this way. One day, all men, meaning all mankind, will be treated as they are created, as equals. Fortunately, I have decidedly more time than the instantaneous grammar or other forms of communication like the twittering of the birds in the trees in your day would otherwise permit. This allows me to continue telling the story of the Declaration of Independence, a story so aptly begun in this series of conversations by my compatriot, Richard Henry Lee. Mr. Lee told you of how, on Friday, June 7th, 1776, he proposed the 3 resolutions that brought us one step closer to a declaration of our independence. The first of the resolutions proposed independence. The second proposed the forming of foreign alliances. The third proposed that we create a plan of confederation between the colonies. On Saturday, June 8th, Congress proceeded to take the first resolution, that of independency, into consideration, and referred it to a committee of the whole, into which they immediately resolved themselves, and passed that day and Monday the 10th in debating on the subject. I took notes on these debates, which I saved as a record for posterity. The debate was not on whether we should become independent, but on when and how. It was argued by James Wilson, Robert R. Livingston, Edward Rutledge, John Dickinson, and others, that though they were friends to the measures themselves, and saw the impossibility that we should ever again be united with Great Britain. Yet they were against adopting them at this time. They said that we should wait for the voice of the people to drive us to it, which would happen soon enough. They essentially argued that we should first effect the second two resolutions by establishing alliances and organizing ourselves internally. Only then would we be ready to officially declare our independence. On the other side, it was argued by John Adams, Mr. Lee, George Wythe, and others that this was the best opportunity we would have, and that if we waited, we would miss our chance. The king had already made us independent by declaring us out of his protection, and no delegates could be denied a power of declaring an existing truth. They said that the people were waiting for us to lead the way. We had to take the risk of making the commitment publicly if we were to expect anyone, be they foreign powers or our own people, to join in the cause. It appearing in the course of these debates that the colonies of New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, Delaware, South Carolina, and Maryland were not yet matured for falling from the parent stem, but that they were fast advancing to that state, it was thought most prudent to wait a while for them, and to postpone the final decision for 3 weeks. But that this might occasion as little delay as possible, a committee was appointed to prepare a Declaration of Independence. The committee were John Adams, Dr. Franklin, Roger Sherman, Robert R. Livingston, and myself. You may be wondering, if Robert R. Livingston of New York had been one of the leading spokesmen for not declaring independence so soon, why was he placed on the committee to draft the Declaration? The people of New York had not voted to support independence by June 11th, but we believed they soon would. Having Mr. Livingston on that committee would encourage them. Roger Sherman of Connecticut was universally respected in Congress as a man of moderation. He, like Livingston, did not participate actively in the drafting process. However, their presence on the committee helped to reassure the more tenuous delegates that this declaration would not be too radical to effect unity. Dr. Franklin was the most well-known and respected of the delegates in the eyes of European nations whom we needed to enlist to our aid. He brought to the committee an international reputation as well as extended practical understanding of what the delicacy of foreign courts would require in a formal declaration. He was not eager to write the draft. I have made it a rule, said he to me, whenever in my power, to avoid becoming the draftsman of papers to be reviewed by a public body. John Adams had been one of the leaders of independency and the independency movement from the very beginning. Moreover, he represented Massachusetts, which had long suffered the worst infringements of rights by Parliament and the King. He was, however, busy with other committees. Among the reasons he gave that I should write the draft was the fact that I was a Virginian. This made sense. The majority of the conflicts having taken place in New England up until that point, part of our task was to convince the southern states that this was their struggle too. Of the southern states, Virginia was the most populous, and had early become a leader in the movement to assert our equal rights. He also acknowledged that, while his vehemence and forthrightness of expression had caused some in Congress to look at him with a jaundiced eye, my own habitual silence during debates, when I made it a practice to take careful notes, meant that the draft coming from my pen would earn it no enemies a priori. Delegates would be more likely to consider the words on their own account. It may seem strange to you that all of the committee members were not vying for the honor of writing such an important document. In June of 1776, none of us realized how important the Declaration of Independence would eventually become. Oh, we knew that what we were doing overall was important, but we thought that the June 7th resolution for independency would be the most memorable document. Between the 11th and the 28th, I primarily worked alone. I did most of the work in one of the 2 rooms that I had rented on the southwest corner of High Street, which you may know better as Market Street, and 7th, from one Mr. Jacob Graff. This location was, at the time, situated toward the outskirts of Philadelphia. At that location I enjoyed the benefits of freely circulating air and more peace and quiet than a more centrally situated living quarters would allow. I wrote a number of drafts, of which I preserved a portion. Dr. Franklin and Mr. Adams made a few alterations during this process. For instance, my original draft read, "We hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable." At the suggestion of the committee, that was changed to the much more scientific expression, "We hold these truths to be self-evident." I knew it was my duty not to find out new principles or new arguments never before thought of, nor merely to say things which had never been said before, but to place before mankind the common sense of the subject in terms so plain and firm as to command their assent, and to justify ourselves in the independent stand we were compelled to take. Neither aiming at originality of principle or sentiment, nor yet copied from any particular and previous writing, it was intended to be an expression of the American mind, and to give to that expression the proper tone and spirit called for by the occasion. It therefore should come as no surprise that I found expressions that harmonized with sentiments expressed elsewhere in the colonies. For instance, the Virginia Bill of Rights, which was adopted by the convention at Williamsburg on the day after our committee had been formed in Philadelphia to write the Declaration, read in part, "That all men are by nature equally free and independent, and have certain inherent rights, of which, when they enter into a state of society, they cannot, by any compact, deprive or divest their posterity, namely, the enjoyment of life and liberty, with the means of acquiring and possessing property, and pursuing and obtaining happiness and safety." After changes by the committee as well as by Congress, the Declaration as approved by the Continental Congress read, "That all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." This brings me to the changes made by Congress. After the committee approved the draft, I reported it to the House on Friday, the 28th of June, when it was read and ordered to lie on the table. Richard Henry Lee kept a tally of the July 2nd vote on the same page where he had written the Independency Resolution. John Adams will tell you the story of the debates and the vote, so I will move my story forward to the afternoon of the 2nd. After the vote on independence, Congress proceeded the same day to consider the Declaration, the announcement of independence. This is when they began to make their changes. The pusillanimous idea that we had friends in England worth keeping terms with still haunted the minds of many. For this reason, those passages which conveyed censures on the people of England were struck out, lest they should give them offense. Congress made many more changes than that, 86 in all, including the shortening of the document by a quarter. On the afternoon of the 4th, it was read aloud for final review and approved. Congress then ordered the Declaration of Independence printed. That part of the story, however, will be told by John Dunlap, the man who printed the document. I was asked to introduce myself and to tell a part of the story of the Declaration of Independence. Having fulfilled those duties, I see that I have a little time left to respond to some questions that have been sent to me. This question is from one Praetoria Berrycloth from Why art then? Pennsylvania. Pretoria writes, you wrote all men are created equal in the Declaration of Independence, yet you owned slaves. Did you attempt to address the issue of slavery while you were writing the Declaration of Independence? Yes, Pretoria. My original draft of the Declaration of Independence included a paragraph condemning the institution of slavery. The paragraph was included in the list of grievances and read thus: he has waged cruel war against human nature itself, violating its most sacred rights of life and liberty in the persons of a distant people who never offended him, captivating and carrying them into slavery in another hemisphere, or to incur miserable death in their transportation thither. This piratical warfare, the opprobrium of infidel powers, is the warfare of the Christian King of Great Britain. Determined to keep open a market where men should be bought and sold, he has prostituted his negative for the suppressing of every legislative attempt to prohibit or to restrain this execrable commerce. And that this assemblage of horrors might want no fact of distinguished dye, he is now exciting those very people to rise in arms among us, and to purchase that liberty of which he has deprived them, by murdering the people upon whom he also obtruded them, thus paying off former crimes committed against the liberties of one people with crimes which he urges them to commit against the lives of another. This paragraph was only implicitly a condemnation of slavery. The purpose of the paragraph was to accuse King George III of committing crimes not only against our rights as British subjects, but against human nature itself. But no matter where I would have included the subject of slavery in the document, I would have needed to express it within the context of a condemnation of the King and of Parliament, because that was the nature of the document I was writing. Congress decided that the subject did not serve as an effective grievance, at least partially because the paragraph seemed to place the blame of slavery entirely on the shoulders of the king. When I was writing the Declaration of Independence, I was serving as counsel for the United States of America in the court of the world, prosecuting King George III and Parliament for crimes under natural law. Of course, I did not include any mention of the fault of the colonies in the matter of slavery, any more than I would have mentioned our own blame in any other subject in my argument. If you ever have the misfortune of needing to retain the assistance of legal counsel, and your attorney begins making arguments for the other side of the case, you may wish to consider seeking new counsel. Perhaps the logic of the paragraph was unwieldy. But if the structure of the grievance was the only issue, Congress could have made alterations to the paragraph, as they made changes elsewhere. Instead, they removed the entire subject of slavery from the document. I maintained ever afterward that their real reason for striking out the clause reprobating the enslaving the inhabitants of Africa was something other than any perceived inefficacy of the writing style or logic. I argue that it was removed in complaisance to South Carolina and Georgia, who had never attempted to restrain the importation of slaves, and who, on the contrary, still wished to continue it. Our northern brethren also, I believe, felt a little tender under those censures, for though their people had very few slaves themselves, yet they had been pretty considerable carriers of slaves to others. What they did was to silence the discussion about the problem within the context of this statement of the underlying reasons for our revolution. I well understand that this is a difficult subject to talk about, but we cannot find a solution for problems we refuse to discuss. Now, see here. This question was sent to me by one Framingham Edivane in Mableknot, Georgia. Framingham writes, how did you feel while Congress was debating and editing the committee's final draft of the Declaration of Independence? Well, Framlington, I admit to you that I was not happy about the edits made by Congress. I was sitting by Dr. Franklin, at the time who perceived that I was not insensible to these mutilations. He then told me the following story. When I was a journeyman printer, said he, one of my companions, an apprentice hatter, having served out his time, was about to open shop for himself. His first concern was to have a handsome signboard with a proper inscription. He composed it in these words: John Thompson, hatter, makes and sells hats for ready money, with a figure of a hat subjoined. But he thought he would submit it to his friends for their amendments. The first he showed it to thought the word hatter tautologous, because followed by the words makes hats, which shows he was a hatter, it was struck out. The next observed that the word makes might as well be omitted, because his customers would not care who made the hats, if good and to their mind, they would buy by whomever made. He struck it out. A third said he thought the words for ready money were useless, as it was not the custom of the place to sell on credit. Everyone who purchased expected to pay. They were parted with, and the inscription now stood, John Thompson sells hats. Sells hats? Said his next friend. Why, nobody will expect you to give them away. What then is the use of that word? It was stricken out, and hats followed it, the rather as there was one painted on the board. So, the inscription was reduced ultimately to John Thompson, with the figure of a hat subjoined. I suppose that the good Dr. Franklin was trying to salve my wounded pride while gently reminding me to take myself a little less seriously. Anyone who has ever written anything to be reviewed by a committee is probably able to relate to the good Mr. Thompson, hatter. If so, they can understand how I felt as the Continental Congress wreaked their depredations upon my work. In spite of my personal feelings, however, I remained silent during the process, because I knew that we needed to use compromise in order to achieve consensus if we were going to overcome this crisis. This question comes all the way from the town of Couchant Pinnacles, California, sent to me by one Gammon with a Goyie. Gammon writes, you mentioned that at the time you were writing the Declaration of Independence, you didn't know how important it was going to become. How did your opinion of what the document means change during your life? What do you hope it will mean to future generations of Americans? Well, Gammon, the Declaration and the 4th of July began to enjoy public fame as early as 1777, with Americans celebrating the day and the document. As both the day and the document were elevated in the popular mind over the years, I became associated with them. This association played a significant role in my being considered by the American people as a representative of what our revolution and our nation stood for. By the time the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence was approaching, I thought of it in the following terms. May it be to the world what I believe it will be, to some parts sooner, to others later, but finally to all, the signal of arousing men to burst the chains under which monkish ignorance and superstition had persuaded them to bind themselves, and to assume the blessings and security of self-government. That form which we have substituted restores the free right to the unbounded exercise of reason and freedom of opinion. All eyes are opened, or opening, to the rights of man. The general spread of the light of science has already laid open to every view the palpable truth that the mass of mankind has not been born with saddles on their backs, nor a favored few booted and spurred, ready to ride them legitimately by the grace of God. These are grounds of hope for others. For ourselves, let the annual return of this day forever refresh our recollections of these rights and an undiminished devotion to them.
Amen.
I tell you what, that's awesome. That is very good. So thanks for finding that. People, things like this, there's so many documents that are just famous, very important documents, and you can go like you did. You went online and
well, I'm particularly
how did you do that?
I'm particularly conscientious about getting authoritative sources, so that this comes from the National Archives was important. We're not making this up.
No, so there's hundreds and hundreds of documents that is stored and preserved, saved for us. And so people can look that up themselves.
Well, and it's important to me that people go to primary sources, because there are so many sources used in the schools that commit the sin of omission. They deliberately omit the Christian values that were driving the ideology of the Mayflower Compact, which was the seminal document that led to the Declaration of Independence, when he said, I wanted to create a document that reflected the American mind. That American mind began with the Mayflower Compact, which is why it is so important to understand 1620, and the Mayflower Compact was the beginning of this country with a formal document. I mean, it was an internal document, internal among the people who arrived on the Mayflower. Nonetheless, it was in writing. The 1619 Project was trying to undermine that history by moving the date and saying that America was founded on slavery. No, 1619 Virginia was English. And it was the British slave trade, which I loved this video for, because what he described as the paragraph removed from his original draft, he discussed in his autobiography. I know this isn't taught in public schools, but Jefferson wrote an autobiography documenting what happened in the Congress that created the Declaration of Independence. That should be a foundational document taught in American civics classes, because it explains when people criticize the Declaration of Independence and say, well, he talked about all men being equal, but he didn't mean blacks. That's a lie. It was in the negotiations with Georgia and South Carolina. They said, we won't sign this document if that paragraph is in there. And he writes that story in his autobiography. So a lot of the perception about our history is promoted by people who want to undermine it. I think one of the most damaging books that was written by historian Charles Beard, who wrote the economic interpretation of the U.S. Constitution. All right? That tells it all. He's going to filter our American history through the lens of the wealth, or the absence thereof, of our founders. That is a very narrow lens, and it wasn't the truth. Two of the movies that recently got released that I recommend everybody who wants to see a more authentic view of our history need to see A Great Awakening about George Whitefield. George Whitefield was an Anglican pastor who was booted out of England because he preached the message of liberty from the scriptures to the people of England. King didn't like that. He's the head, right? So George Whitefield comes over to the colonies, which is not yet the United States. But 10 years before this Declaration of Independence is developed, he's preaching from the pulpit the liberty that God has in mind for his people. But in order to be free, they have to self-govern through the laws of the scriptures. And that is the American mind. You can't, and John Adams wrote this, our Constitution is written for a virtuous people and for none other. It won't succeed if you are not governing yourselves, knowing that you have a higher authority, which is God, and you will be beholden to him on your day of judgment. So everybody at that time, and this is why I brought these books. Let me see if I can find the right way for the camera. All right, the Hebrew Republic. This is a secular book written and published at Harvard University Press. I say that because I want you to know this is not me filtering through the lens of my Christian worldview, hoping that everybody else will assume my worldview too. This is written by a historian at Harvard, and he's saying that the biblical worldview at the time was fully represented in the Constitution by at least half of the people in that committee being educated in seminary, which is what Harvard originally was established to do. Harvard got corrupted over time by replacing the board that ran the university with people who had a different agenda. And they knew if they could hijack the education system, they could control ideas and control America's perception of our founding, our reason for being. And that brings me back to Charles Beard, the economic interpretation of the United States. And what do we hear about the education system now? That it's for workforce development. That's just not true. The public education system was established to educate future leaders of our country. And this comes back to Jefferson's notes on Virginia. His hope was that a publicly funded education system could be established, and this was what happened in Virginia, would be established to provide free education up through the elementary grades so that, as per the book of Exodus 18 to 23, chapters 18 to 23, teach everyone the law. Teach everyone what your government, your history, and the skills they need to make their own decision making. Teach that to everybody so that in your next level of education, you can select out of that group those who are gifted for government and then educate them in a special way. Jefferson intended that education up through the university level be free to cultivate leadership so that the republic would survive under good leadership that was educated in the principles of our country, principles and values. So you hijack that, and this all began in the 1930s, and before that, really, in the 19-teens. After the Civil War, when Rockefeller and Carnegie started taking over the funding of education through their grant system, the whole point, the whole purpose of that preservation of the republic got corrupted into workforce development. And now what you have is a citizenry that doesn't know our history, that doesn't know the Christian foundation. Whether or not you're a believer, you were to know the Christian foundation and where it came from. You were to be biblically literate. And Jefferson and Ben Franklin, the two founders who are considered the most irreligious people, actually were served on another committee that was to create the image for the United States. And they both came back with images of the Exodus in a seal form as a proposal. And the idea was that King George was represented as Pharaoh, and that the exodus of the people out of that enslavement represented the people of the United States being liberated. Both of them had those similar images. What Congress eventually adopted was the symbol of the American eagle as our seal because it was American Indian. We were going to identify with what was uniquely American. That's another, you might say, deliberate misrepresentation of our history. If you look at the the statue at the top of the U.S. Capitol. It is a female Indian dressed in a fur robe with feathers in her hair, and her name is Freedom. It was a deliberate selection of the new world that America represented and the freedom that the American Indian enjoyed, and that we were now going to enjoy it too. So that's one book, The Hebrew Republic. This is another, Reading the Bible with the Founding Fathers. This was from the Oxford University Press. This is one from the Presbyterian Church. It's one of their own documents called Presbyterians in the American Revolution. If anybody doubted that there was a biblical worldview, they need to get a copy of this book, because the American Revolution, King George called the Presbyterian Revolution, because it was the Presbyterian pastors, again, who were preaching from the scriptures about God's plan for liberty and freedom, the equality of all men, things the king didn't really want you to know. So, George was upset with this. There were, one of the things in the video was the discussion of the South being reluctant to join the northern colonies in this Declaration of Independence. I contend that American independence began in 1620. It began when the Mayflower flew off course and was not, they were headed towards a colony that they were just going to join, but they flew off course into an entirely new territory that was not chartered, and set up a system that honored the king but honored God more. So he was the higher authority. That was the Mayflower Compact. The South, however, had already been established as traditional English colonies, very loyal to the king, and that's why the South was reluctant to join the North, and that's why Massachusetts suffered more. John Adams, as a citizen of Massachusetts and an attorney, he and Jefferson had a very tumultuous friendship. I will call it that, because they were both attorneys. They were both brilliant. They had different ideas about how independence should be expressed in government. But then they had this falling out, and I wouldn't say they were arch enemies, but they were furious with each other. And it was actually John Adams' wife, Abigail Adams, who said, look, you need to end this feud. And eventually they started writing letters to each other again. What's interesting is that 50 years after the signing of the Declaration of Independence, both men, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, died on the same day. I think that's prophetic.
Yeah,
I
didn't know that.
Yes, they died on the same day. And so there was this bond of a relationship, and they didn't know. They that the other had officially passed, but that's what happened. And they had both served as presidents. That said, his relationship with John wanted kind of an aristocracy limited by a form of government similar to Parliament limiting the king. Jefferson said absolutely not. And this is in one of his letters, which I had hoped to bring, but I misplaced before I got here. There's a letter between Adams and Jefferson, where Jefferson expresses the difference between the birthright aristocracy and what he calls the natural aristocracy. And he actually links the class system of the birthright aristocracy to eugenics, where the classes of wealth believe that they're not just preserving their wealth through marriages, but they're also preserving you might say, a section of the human race that is above everybody else. And if you go to see the movie Young Washington, this is one of the two movies I wanted to recommend to you, A Great Awakening and Young Washington. I went to see Young Washington the morning of the 4th of July. I was so smitten by it that when I visited friends on July 5th, they all wanted to see it too, and I went again. It's a movie I'd like to own because you can't get enough of it. You go back and you see the detail that they paid attention to make this movie. But it's the experience of George Washington that shows the difference in how his half-brother was treated versus him, all right? Two brothers from the same father, but because the older brother inherits land and he's educated in England, he is considered of a different class that can marry the Fairfaxes in Virginia. His father dies. George is left to be a tenant farmer on his brother's property. He's not able to go to school to be educated because he has to help produce saleable product to feed everybody on the property. But they have the same gene pool, okay? And that's the essence of the movie, is showing the background experiences where George knows who he is. He knows what his talents are. He knows what his value is as a human being. But he's treated differently by the system, even though his brother is in a different class. His brother tutors him on everything he knows. So he's even intellectually and educationally the same as his brother. And eventually he uses all of this to establish himself not as a subject of the king, although he was loyal, but when you're repeatedly treated as substandard, you have to break that loyalty in order to assert who you are as a child of God, right? And George eventually leaves that loyalty and establishes himself as a Virginian, as all of the colonies did. They established themselves as members of those colonies. It wasn't until the Constitution that we became one nation, really. That said, George Washington then becomes the leader of the men of Virginia. And that begins. So if you've got these Virginians of Madison, Jefferson, Washington, they are all, of the same mind. We cannot stay with a king who doesn't recognize our humanity. Jefferson, again, he also recognized that in the humans who were being trafficked for slavery. It was other states. And the problem here with Jefferson is that he married the daughter of a slave trader, okay, which probably made for some very interesting family conversations. It was her father, who was the slave trader, owned slaves, and when he died, she inherited them. His family did have a few, but not like her. The thing is, then she dies, and he is not only responsible for the property she brought in, but for the debt. And that's what he can't get rid of. He did not get rid of it in his lifetime. As a matter of fact, the Library of Congress tried to help Jefferson out by buying his books and establishing the Library of Congress. That said, it still wasn't finished. It wasn't until his daughter's son, Jefferson's grandson, was able to pay off the debt that he was clear. But when you think about that, think about an English slave trader with all of that debt, Jefferson writing this Declaration of Independence. Do you think the banks of London are going to show pity on Jefferson? I mean, get a grip. No. That's why, but they're not teaching the truth of our history. Mm-hmm. And you have these enemies of the United States who have hijacked our education system, are promoting falsehoods and misrepresentation of the human beings who were our founders. and trying to teach our children to hate our country. When the whole time what the founders were saying is, look, all we did is launch this. It's going to be for every generation after us to develop it further. That's why the Constitution is amendable. They knew they couldn't think of everything just in one sitting, right? They knew that each generation was going to be faced with problems they had not yet seen, and that the Constitution had to have mechanisms for being flexible. I think that's an incredible foresight. They built it that way, to respond to the trials of the times in each generation.
They didn't know about AI at the time.
And they did not know about AI creating its own persona, right? And that's why you even have legislation in the states being passed saying we don't recognize as persons fabrications of AI who present themselves as persons, chatbots. Right? You can't marry a chatbot. You actually have to write a law for that because
somebody probably has.
Yes, you have a culture in Japan where lonely people, rather than trying to address their own social emotional issues, are marrying dummies. You got situations where people say they're marrying themselves. Come on, how far down do you go? So this gets back to the fact that these founders knew they didn't know everything, but
hey, Mary, we're going to have to wrap it up. I've got 5 minutes to do sponsors.
Yeah, we'll do that. Yeah, the thing is, being flexible in our Constitution does not give anyone license to rewrite it without the process that's been put in place to change it. And that's what's happening. Congress passed statutes. Statutes are not amendments to the Constitution, but they pass statutes trying to undermine the Constitution. And that's what has to change. We have to educate our people again through public schools or whatever education system people are enrolled in to develop leaders who know what the Constitution and our system is about and our values as a Christian country. Send them to Congress and fix this thing.
Very good. I tell you what, I hope everyone's enjoyed our video today and the discussion that Mary led, because I think that's really good. Now we've got time to do our sponsors. I want to make sure we do that. They're extremely important. Brad Pistow is certified fiduciary financial planner located in Ozark, Missouri. And people say already, hey, I don't live in Missouri. That's okay. He's licensed in 18 states and he has associates in all 50 states. He's travels around the country speaking, and he writes books. You can call. I hope you have paper and pencil. I know the people that normally watch every week, they have paper and pencil ready, but please have that. We're going to give you some information you want to write down. His phone number, 417-581-9222. 417-581-9222. Please answer, call, and Lisa will answer that phone. If you don't live anywhere around the area, he'll still talk to you and give you a name to talk to. He is probably one of the best in the entire country, not just our state, on financial planning. He has plans that make sure that you do not run out of your life before you run out of money. I use him. Many of my friends, business associates use him. And they also have a branch in their company that takes care of investments. If you want to invest in stocks, bonds, gold, silver, whatever you want to invest in, they do that too. They also are Medicare specialists, and so if you're at the age where you're going to be needing to sign up for Medicare, they do all those things. They will send you a book free, bulletproof or Safe Money Matters. In one of those books, they'll do all kinds of things. He writes articles all the time for USA Today, Wall Street Journal, all over the country doing things. Highly recommend Brad Pistow. That's Ozarks Retirement Group, and very, very good. The other sponsor we have is Springfield Nissan, Springfield Kia, longtime sponsor. They're located again in Ozark, in Springfield, Missouri. They're located in Springfield, Missouri. Their phone number is 417-882-3838. 417-882-3838. And again, they will, if Susan will answer the phone, they'll get you to the right person. They've got a special going on right now. I'm looking for another car for my wife. And so they're actually bringing a car tomorrow, a Kia Sportage. And they're bringing that car tomorrow, and we're going to keep it over the weekend. We're going to keep it Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We're going to bring it back on Monday. If that's not the car we want to buy, then we will look at a different car. So this is the kind of service they give. I bought a Kia Sorrento SUV on Labor Day this past year. You just got through buying a Rogue, Nissan Rogue, not very long ago.
Right.
And we all love our cars. We've got several people that we know that we've recommended that bought cars. Our assessor down there in Christian County bought a Sportage hybrid. I'm probably not going to buy a hybrid. I'm probably just going to buy a gas. I'm kind of old-fashioned, and I don't know. Maybe I should someday, but right now I'm still buying the old conventional gas cars, but honestly, we highly recommend both of them. So I want to make sure. I want to see what time we've got. 4 minutes. I do want to let everyone know next Wednesday, July 15th, Dr. Mary has a person lined up to talk about Amendment 4, Constitutional Amendment 4 in the August 4th election. We have 4 amendments we're going to be voting on in August in Missouri. You might learn something in another state. These are citizen-driven petitions initiative petitions that have started to flood our Constitution. I believe that our Constitution is about 137, 140 pages in this state. And the U.S. Constitution is probably 40 to 50 pages.
Yeah, you have to understand. They call it Citizen Petition Initiative, but it's out-of-state money.
Yeah. And so if you don't like gambling, we've got gambling now where they've reversed. We passed, when I was a state rep in 2019, the most stringent abortion bill ever in the state of Missouri, and they've appealed that. And so now abortion is legal in the state of Missouri. They did that way. Legalizing marijuana, they've done
all
it that
out-of-state
way.
money.
All out-of-state money. So anyway, we'll be doing that. We're also going to be talking about Axe Fest. This will be the 33rd year. We want people to know about Axe Fest. It's July 17th and 18th, so that's next week. I want to make sure we spend some time talking about Axe Fest because everyone's invited. You're maybe not be able to come here. You could come here physically, but if you can't come here, we're going to have it where you can watch it. So anyway, we'll be back next week. We hope you enjoyed the show today, and
check out this document that Dennis is going to post with this video. It's called the America 250 Faith Gap, and it validates what I've been saying about the deliberate attempt to remove the Christian worldview and values from the teaching of American history. And it's just one more resource you can share that gives evidence of the deliberate activity to undermine the United States and the development of leadership that knows how to govern.
Very good, Dr. Byrne. So just lastly, I tell you what, Acts Ministry loves everybody that's watching our show. We love people that don't watch our show. This is the day. If you're not a Christian, if you don't have Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, today is the day. Don't wait. Go to 4321ACTS@gmail.com, and we'll tell you how to find Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior.